of people.
So on that side of the family, it was your mom's side or your dad's
Yeah,
side?
my mom's side.
Your mom's side,
Was in
everybody
Minnesota.
lived in Minnesota. So your mom had how many sisters and brothers?
Well, there were 11 living altogether,
A
And
couple of them
and then
died.
her youngest brother died with appendicitis operation, so that left 10.
And there was
And then
couple of babies.
Uncle Hans was a bachelor until he went to California. Finally, at the age of 70, got married for 1 year.
how many lived in Minnesota?
But Hans lived in Minnesota, Dick Buck and Dick Buck's family, with Sini Buck, that's one family, and the Anna's was another family. Then next to Asco, and he was in, that's called Minnesota too, Sandstone, there lived another set of cousins.
In Wisconsin, right over the border.
And then Wisconsin, we had my oldest uncle lived over there, kind of in the woods all by himself.
Did you always go to Minnesota, or did you ever go to like somebody else's place?
Well, we went once in a while to this place in Wisconsin, but we didn't like it too well. And I can remember hanging on the big fence that they had that you open and shut to get in, and just wishing that my folks would drive down the road and come and take me home. So I know when the little kids say, I want to go home, I know how they feel. Because it was nothing to do. He was nice, but he didn't know how to handle, he hadn't had any children at that time, and he was quite old. And he eventually had 2, and they both had
I didn't get to meet them or
troublesome
stay there till I was
childhoods
married.
because he did not know how to handle or entertain you or anything. But one thing was,
Did your mom go to Minnesota the whole time you were there? Or did you kind of get left?
well, sometimes she would drive us there, and sometimes we-
Anytime I went, she was with.
and then anyway, this
Mom's got it.
Peggy's there. When we went to up to this fellow's place in Wisconsin, my brother and I, we went to the show one night, and coming home he had to use lights on his car. Well, he didn't have lights on his car, so my brother and I laid on the engine, and we each held a flashlight,
On the hood of the car.
and that's how we got home that night. And I'll never forget that, because boy, it was dark, and the curves were really curvy on a gravel road.
But we played almost childhood games most of the time when we were there. Go down the road and dig houses out of the sand,
Dunes.
no, not dunes really, it's the side of the road. They went, it seemed like when they made the road, they had, at least there was an up to it, so all along here we could build and have sand,
So
like the Indians did, really.
Where were you at in Minnesota?
Yeah, Minnesota.
Yeah,
And
but
we
where?
also visited in
Asheville.
Charles City, Iowa.
Is that near Minneapolis, St. Paul?
It's
or-
halfway between Minneapolis and Superior.
Yeah, it was a.
So it was out in the middle of nowhere, pretty
Yeah,
much, right?
almost.
And was it a farm or what?
It was a
All
farm.
farm life
And
up
except
there.
my grandfather had a
Nursery,
nursery.
grew pine trees.
So the place where you stayed was a farm.
Yeah.
And did they actually grow crops or did they raise?
No, no, they grew
Cattle.
corn
So they
And
grew
cattle.
corn.
and
cattle and
oats or wheat
corn.
and so on.
So did they have a big farmhouse, big enough for everybody
No,
to stay
I
there?
said,
Or
all the girls, this was the girls' room. So all the girls slept there, and all the boys slept there. So they only had like 3 bedrooms, but we scads of people.
but where did the grown-ups stay?
They had their own.
Like where did your mom stay?
I think she usually went in and stayed with her mom and dad.
Yeah, that was a big house. But
No,
they had,
it wasn't. It was.
well,
I saw it a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and I couldn't believe how
but
small
it was still big for
And
those
they
days.
had all these people that kept coming. Even for lunch every day, they'd have maybe 15, 20 people. And if anybody came along and said, I'm hungry, can I?
So whose bedroom were you staying in?
At Ann and Charlie,
The
my
girls,
cousins,
What was your cousin's name?
Edith
That was
and
her
Leslie.
bedroom?
Even
Leslie and Edith.
Leslie and Edith. So that was their bedroom, and all the girls would stay in with them. And then, who was the boy? What was his bedroom? His name?
There was
See,
Glenn,
the one
was
that
the
died,
older-
that older Krantz.
yeah, Glenn and Philip
Kenneth.
and Kenneth. And
But see, Glenn, Philip, they were just little tiny guys, so I don't know, they must have been in a crib or something at that time. Some little ones.
So what did you do on the farm?
what'd we do?
Yeah.
Oh, we had lots of fun. I was
They tell
kind of an
stories of
instigator.
it.
I was a little bit older than all the cousins that stayed there. And we'd spend the part of the summer making up plays. And then we would get our production ready to go. And I used all the girls and everything in this production, and we would invite all the grown-ups so all the relatives came from town, and my aunt and
No,
uncle
we
made
also had friends down the way too.
homemade ice cream, you know, you crank yourself. And we'd put on our play, and every year we put on a play. And then in between, when we just played together, we had a bakery, and we took mud and made bakery cakes and cookies and all that stuff out of that. And they thought that was lots of fun.
Yeah. But my one uncle played in a band. We went to a band concert when we were up there.
And then when we were older,
They didn't have electricity out there,
no,
so they didn't
Not
have
for a long time.
electricity. Did they have like a refrigerator that took block ice?
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Everybody had ice, even us.
And where did the ice come from?
I'm trying to think if they had ice.
Well, yeah, they had ice, but there was always an ice man someplace that had gotten the ice out of the lake, and somehow they were able to hold on to the ice
You
and
all
keep
took
it
your same
sawdust.
bath in the same water in a wash tub.
You have to pump your water out of the well.
Mm-hmm.
And did you have to carry it into the house in jugs or anything?
Well,
They
the
had a
boys
pump in
did.
the kitchen sink.
The
You know, a lot
boys-
of times when you pump water out of a well, it doesn't look very clean. So was it like
We
a?
didn't have any idea.
Notice, but I always tried to be the first one in the thing before all those people got in there, because I was used to running water and showers, and so being in the little
Did
bit,
you take a bath once a week or every day?
about once a week.
Once a week.
Well, my dad took a bath once a week.
Was
then-
there
And
like
then
a pond or anything you go swimming in or a lake?
no, there was very little water. It was a
It was a dry,
real dry area. And they had a couple of places, but it was so gooey and yucky in the
Yeah.
bottom that
And it was not.
I would swim for a while because I could stay on top of the water, but I didn't want to touch the bottom. So,
No, I never,
but then we
I
went to
never
a
went
lot of
swimming.
parties there that were lots of fun because they always did some round dancing and things which I dearly loved. And so I fell madly in love with one of the boys there. And I just couldn't wait for him to ask me to dance at one of those games, you know. And it took a little while, but he finally did. And anyway, we play these games, kind of folk songs and folk games, Danish games. And they all could speak Danish. All my cousins can speak Danish, but us.
Why was that?
My
Well,
mother said we were in America,
went
we're
to
going to learn to talk.
but in
We're not
school-
going to talk Danish because we're going to talk
their
American.
school was Danish
English.
and their church was Danish.
Yeah, but that was
So-
all. And then mother would talk about us to my dad. They would talk in Danish. I could understand some of that, but no, and we're sorry that she didn't want us to do it. But I can understand her patriotism.
Mhm.
She thought that would be unpatriotic to talk
But
another
now
language.
so many of my cousins can speak Danish and read Danish and write Danish, and
We can't.
we can't. So,
But anyhow, I think
They
we'd say
were
we
all-
had a really good life.
Good
Yeah,
time.
We resented having to work some of it, part of it, but that's natural for kids to not wanna work. Because I can remember reading a book and I was supposed to be dusting and I'd read, cause there's a swinging door between the kitchen and the dining room. And nobody could tell what I was up to, so I could read a while, and if I heard footsteps, I quick hid the book in a cushion and go about my dusting. And we, like I say, we practiced golf there real often, the putting in the front room and the other stuff.
So after the kids left the house, what did your parents do? They stay in the same
no,
place?
they had to move to an apartment, because that was after they
Yeah, my
lost
folks
their
had been in a
house.
couple of apartments.
And they went to an apartment, and it wasn't the same,
No,
so,
but they still had family parties.
yeah.
That's
Well,
what
they always had
So
these
we
big
always saw a
parties
lot of that Miller side of the family.
in the winter time particularly, and we saw the other side of the family in the summertime. Up in-
Yeah, but not that often. I don't think I was ever more than 4 or 5 times up in Minnesota over all
Well, I
my
was
years.
there a lot.
Well, you were different. You got away with it stuff. But
So how long did your parents stay in the apartment after the kids
Well,
left?
then they got a house later, and from the house, they moved to my house.
In Chinook.
Yeah. But they did live in a house and,
Well, it was sort of a duplex, wasn't
yeah, yeah, but it's,
Why did they go to Chinook?
Because
because we didn't think they could take
they
care
had
of
been
them.
sickly and we thought they needed taken care of and
And when was that? What year?
Oh, gosh, I have no idea.
they got a trailer and lived on where Dickie is now. I don't think I can put a year. Mother had a couple cancer operations and Dad had a operation.
40s, 50s?
But it was a kind of a mistake, because.
I was sorry after it was
Because
all
they
over.
didn't have they had so many friends, and they had these parties periodically to keep them, playing cards and everything, and,
No, your dad wasn't happy.
he wasn't happy. And mother did better in Shinola than he did, because he didn't find this group. He found some for a while uptown that they played cards a certain day a week or something, that he liked that, but, I'm sorry we had to move really, because.
But his brother began to die and his friends began to die and he wanted to die and so he did, but the year Beth was born. I said, don't you want to see Beth? No, I don't want to see Beth.
So did they move in the 50s?
No, see, Beth was born in March of, Beth is what, 30?
Beth was born like 65 or 66.
Somewhere in there. Well, that's when my dad died, and so they had to come in the 50s.
I didn't think that, that generation had started yet. I thought it was somebody, I think it
Oh,
was Susan.
Oh no, Susan was born in Chicago long before we ever got there. No, Beth was about to be born. My dad didn't want to see her, and he wanted to die, and he did die in February, and Beth was born in March.
Whenever the doctor said to me, "What did your father die of?" I said, "He died just because he wanted to die. He was through
How old was
living."
he?
He was 80-something, let's see.
But see,
If
all
we get
his
the
brothers
year-
had gone,
he
and they
was-
were
He was
so
born in,
close as a family.
he was born 1881, and then he died, let's say Beth was, well, how old? When
I
you
was
went
born
to
in
Denmark,
67.
you were how old when you went on a trip?
Beth's 2 years older than me, or a year and a half or
Two.
something.
And you were born?
I was born in 67, so she was born in like 65
5.
or 66.
Well, let's see. 4. Oh,
She's like
I said Beth's
84.
not 84. He was about 84. 83 or 84 when he
Oh, I
died.
didn't tell you about my machine I worked. It could also subtract, and multiply and divide real fast.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful machine.
Yeah, that was the one.
In
You
those
never
days.
even hear
You
about
think
it.
you could still do it if you got one?
I still do a lot of that way. I can multiply that way real fast, or fairly fast, and divide and so on.
I do. When I talk to kids, I said, how long are you to remember your times tables? Forever. And I said, I'm a proof of it, because I still know my combinations. So if they once learn them, they can learn them forever. That has nothing to do with our
Merle
story.
gave a girl
Yeah.
a $20 bill for a $17 charge or something, and she could not figure out how much money to give him back from a 20 when the bill was 17. She couldn't figure that out. Now, that's the way the kids are now. They don't know how, like every one of yours has to put it over there where the machine does it. And it's just that they can't figure it. Just automatically I can subtract and multiply.
My mother was 83 when she died, because she died the same year Susan did. And
So your father was 20 years, no,
she,
7 years older.
he was 7 years older than her.
So how did you end up in Shinola?
I married Ted. Well, see, at Swift and Company, you weren't supposed to date anybody in your division.
Right.
And you were not even supposed to go down and have coffee with them. If they did, couple of times they called me over to the boss of the department, called me over and said, now we just don't allow you to have coffee with any of the same employees. But see, I had heard that he had a girlfriend and he was engaged to be married, and they said, so don't even think about getting him to date you. So I made up my mind, well, I am too, I'm gonna make sure he does. And so we had coffee a couple times together and donuts, but you weren't to be seen doing that. That was, I don't know really why that was so bad.
Well, we couldn't be married if we were taught school either, when I first started. So we,
No, two people didn't work, two people in a house did not work in those days.
Yeah.
It was almost against the law. And right shortly after we got married, we rented a room to
What year did you get married?
39. We rented a room to a school teacher, and nobody knew she was married, but if they did, she could not have taught school because her husband worked on the roads. He was a worker out on the roads. But she didn't tell anybody for years and years, and she ended up down near us in Arizona,
Where did you get married?
in that Danish church in Chicago.
the new Danish church,
And what year did you get married?
38 in the same church,
Same
oddly
church.
enough.
So you got married, and then a year later she got married.
That had a story that's funny. She's so foxy so many times. My mother had wherever she lives, there is a storeroom. And that was the same thing as these sheds that people are using, just the extra stuff gets stored in there.
Was it separate from the house? Or was
Oh,
it in
no,
the house?
usually in the basement
Okay.
of if you had an apartment building, they were in the basement. Each apartment had their own storeroom. And so she would buy things many times to give us as we were growing older, but she just didn't really want to give it to us. So she put it in the storeroom, save it for another day.
Yeah.
Okay, so something that was important to us was a hand-painted set of dishes that her girlfriend fixed for her when she got married. And Mother said that she would give it to the first one married. Okay, so then she didn't give it to me though, right off, but I knew I was gonna get it. Okay, till she come along. So I got married in 1938, and a year later she got married. But because she's 6 years younger than I am, she says that meant I got married first. Well, just before right after almost she made that remark, the storeroom caught fire.
Oh no.
And
Nobody got the dishes.
so most of them were gone. You know, there was just
Did the whole house burn, or just
no,
that storeroom?
just down the storeroom.
What caused it to burn?
Who knows? Combustion maybe, or nobody
Storing
smoked.
fuel in there?
No,
Was there electricity down there?
oh yeah. Could have been a short wire, who knows? I don't know. I don't remember discussion about it or anything. I wasn't living there anyhow. So I wouldn't have heard any ordinary discussion, but, so the dishes practically went. So then nobody got them.
Nobody got it.
But she's foxy enough to think that out, though she was bent on getting those dishes. I don't know if I still have a cup from that or not. But anyhow, we didn't fare so well.
We had a very good life.
So after you got married, that was probably getting close to the war. Did you go
It
to
was
Shinoa?
started- We were,
Did you go to Shinoa then?
She lived in
we,
there.
we
when
went
it
to
happened.
Shinoa about a year after we got married because his mother owned part of the store.
IGA.
Yeah, and,
And
but then
uncle.
she got married, and they were gonna move to Florida. And so she made him a good offer on buying her share of the store,
Made who?
Ted.
All right, see that.
And,
With his uncle.
Hmm?
With his uncle.
yeah, oh yeah, his uncle and grandfather were still in it.
So were you living, after you got married, did you live in Chicago in an apartment? Or,
No, it was
No, in
decided
Shinoa.
before,
huh?
it was decided before we got married that we were going to Shinoa.
So you lived in Shinoa. And did you work in Shinoa?
not
After
for
you
a
got married?
while.
The IGA store, she did.
Well, I mean,
No,
that
no.
took a year to get that.
Yeah,
It took a while because they,
but she didn't work.
there again, you weren't supposed to work and Ted said, my wife is not gonna work, blah, blah.
Where did Ted work? Did he work in the
In the
IGA?
store,
yeah.
So he was working in the IGA
Mhm.
as like a clerk or
Well,
stocking or just
everything.
doing everything.
You were an all-around guy there.
And then his mom decided that she was going to go to Florida.
Well, she decided that before he went back there.
Oh,
'cause
before
he
he got
had-
married.
Mm-hmm. That's why we went.
Bad marriage, that one.
The first one was
The mother's a bad marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still think he's guilty of killing her.
So you guys moved to Chenoa. Where did you live in Chenoa first?
It was a big old house.
A big bath.
And we had the
too.
first floor, but we didn't have the kitchen. So I had no kitchen. But we had this, like she said, a big bathroom and had a big tub, great big tub.
Where at in
You're-
Chenoa?
Your grandpa could really fit that.
A street further, let's see, west than where we live now and down a block. It was,
Is the house still there?
it burnt down, no.
Oh,
It was old. And, but anyway, we had a good time, we had big parties, and we had to do the dishes in the bathtub.
Did you have plumbing and electric there?
Oh, yeah, we had, everything was in the house. Yeah, we had plumbing.
How long did you stay there?
Not too long, we moved to as soon as we could get another house, we moved to another house over on Division Street. And that was a yellow house, and it was nice, it had everything you really needed, and upstairs with 2 or 3 bedrooms, and downstairs it had living room, dining room, kitchen, and so on.
So
Then we built a house.
what year did Grandpa have to go into the service?
About that,
40,
because she came and moved back with me. We lived in another house, because we rented our house.
well, wait a minute, we were
Yeah.
in Chicago first. You went out with Ted, and I went into Chicago, and Edward got drafted finally, but Ted had already been in California a couple of years. And then you came back, you had rented your house out, so you didn't have a place to go, so you came into Chicago, and I don't remember who you stayed with while you were there. I know I rented a duplex, and I worked in the morning, and then a neighbor worked in the afternoon. We switched kids, but during that little time we were in Chicago together, we delivered telephone books and
That's the
took
job.
back telephone books from people and got a nickel a book. And then we moved to Chenoa, the 2 of us, to this place across from the IGA store.
So in 1939 you got married. And you went to Chenoa. And you worked at the store. And then what year did...
I didn't work until after.
Well, Grandpa worked at the store. What year did he go into the service?
It had to be like 42.
Well, Barbara was born in 41, and he was home then, and he was home when Dickie was born. That would be
42.
43 or 44, right?
So it was later towards
Yeah,
the
he
end of
tried
it.
to
Yeah,
volunteer,
both my husband and her
and they
was
wouldn't
later.
take him, but they took him by, what is it, they call draft.
Draft.
They drafted.
So who ran the store?
His
Why they
uncle
were
and his
gone.
grandfather. And finally, we were out in San Diego, and that's where I worked at that big department store. And finally, they wrote us a letter and said, we need you back here. And by that time, I liked my job real well in the department store, and I paid off the mortgage. I was bound and determined all the money I made was gonna pay off the mortgage, so.
The mortgage on what?
Well, we had built a new house.
So you paid off the mortgage on the new house.
Mhm.
When did the new house get built?
41, 42, right after Barbara was born. We moved in, so. And it was the only house that had been built in Chenoa in about 20 years.
Really?
Mhm. There was not even a carpenter in Chenoa because nobody was building. Everybody was out of money.
But while the war was on, you rented it out, so that's why we lived together in this old
Mhm.
house next to the Methodist church.
So
across
you
from the
rented your
IGC.
house out
Mhm.
to who?
To a real nice couple for $25 a month. And but I tell you, when we came home, the basement was as clean as a whistle. You could rub your hand over the furnace and there would be no dust on it, no dirt on it. And we had coal furnace, so.
My dad put the heating in her
But
house.
they were so clean and so great. So that's how really I got my house in San Diego. They didn't rent to women with children out there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I had 2 children with me. And I was just about ready to go home because you were allowed, they had a place for you, the wives to stay for 4 days. And I was about to go home and we were in a drugstore for some reason eating breakfast. I don't know why I was in a drugstore. It had to be a happenstance. And while we were there, we got talking to the man that was at the bar there too, and he said he was going home in a couple of days. Oh, I said, and where do you live? And he told me, and I said, oh, just suppose she would rent to me? And he said, no, she won't rent to anybody with children. I said, well, give me her name. So he gave me her name, and I went over there. And I told him that I had this nice home in Chenoa, and I had rented it for $25 a month, and that was a lot of money. And so she eventually let me have the house. But then I had to go back to where we were staying and ask another lady to move in with us to pay half the rent.
Mm-hmm.
So I found one, and she had 2 children, and I had 2 children. And we didn't really associate too much with each other, but we paid half and half, and it made it cheaper to live. And we had a real great time in San Diego.
How much did it cost to build the house?
I think we paid $5,000.
$5,000 to build the house?
Yeah, but then my dad came down and put in the heating, and this person did this, so it wasn't really the complete cost, but that was the actual cost to the builder, that he came and built. And that house is just as good today as it was the day it was built.
And you had the house paid off in like 4 years?
Yeah, because I was determined that it was going to pay off that house. I didn't like bills and mortgages and interest. I hated paying interest. I still do.
Well,
And so you moved into the yellow house with her,
It was a red house,
the
huh?
red house?
oh, this was, I don't know, something next to the
Yeah.
between Methodist Church.
What year
and
was that?
44, or 40, last of 43 and 44, because Edward got out of the service in 44.
The,
So how long did you guys live together then?
Oh, it might have been a year. There we had an icebox on the porch.
And where were you working at?
teaching in Chenoa.
I was teaching, no, I wasn't teaching in Chenoa.
You weren't.
I got to teach in a country school near Chenoa
Yeah.
for a little bit, but I wasn't really teaching. I was just there. Just that short, I think 3 months I taught in that country school where Ted's cousins' kids were those nice girls, you know.
And then after you,
His Aunt Catherine.
after you guys left the red house, where did you go?
Then I went to Chicago.
You went to Chicago for how long?
Oh gosh, you know I've chased all my life from Chicago.
She
from
moved a
moving.
million times.
In my married life, I moved 25 times, so,
Why were you moving so much?
because
Her
her husband was, in
wanted
the first
to-
place, he was a traveling salesman, and in the second place, when somebody liked what he was doing, they would say, wouldn't you like to work for me? So, okay.
So he jumped from job to job to job. You would think he'd jump around jobs good enough, you'd finally end up with a really good one, you wouldn't have to do anything.
He had a good one. He did, well, he had an accident, that one, on the last. But we never got in with anybody long enough, no retirement ever. And that was bad, because I used to say to the boys, whatever you do something and get retirement.
And so Grandma, you got control of the store, the whole thing. When did that happen?
Well, we bought his uncle out.
When was that?
I'm no good with dates.
Yeah. That's
Like how many years after the war?
Well, it was several, but
Several years.
quite a few, yeah.
and but he didn't like working with his uncle. He liked the grandpa,
Yeah.
but
Niall was a little hard to,
yeah, he was a little but they were good bridge players.